Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Pink and Channels. I'm Connor Southwell, delighted to be joined by former Norwich City player Luke Chadwick for a very good reason, which we'll come on to for a moment. But Luke, first and foremost, how are you? How's your summer been? It's always an interesting time of year for footballers and for ex-footballers and for us guys, where maybe there's not so much to get your teeth into and you can have a little bit of a rest. Has that been the case for you this summer?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you, Connor. Yeah, I had a lovely summer so far, enjoying the lovely weather for a change early on, which has been great. But yeah, a relaxing time. Still quite busy at work with the stuff that I do with the Football Fun Factory, but having a nice time and enjoying the weather.
It's brilliant to see, brilliant to catch up with you because, and I have it to my left here, you've got a new book out. Congratulations on that. It is called Not Just a Pretty Face. Really good. I spent last night reading this, actually. Some really good bits in it. It's uh, as it says on the front cover, football fun and despair, and I think you do get both sides of that. You get the highs of your career, obviously the lows of your career as well. There's some bits in it that are really raw, really really quite sort of emotional to read. There are other points in it as well which are excellent, and the anecdotes, the people that you've met along the way. I guess whenever a footballer or anyone writes a book, sort of the question is kind of why now? What was it that sort of made you think the time was right for you to kind of tell your story, I guess? So what was the thinking behind doing that at this moment?
Yeah, so it's something that I've never really thought about doing before. My fantastic co-writer Matthew Mann got in touch with me a couple of years ago and sort of asked if it was something I'd consider doing. I was thinking I'm in an erring a lot about whether to do it or not. There's also always great fears in terms of putting a book out there and then it doesn't sell and no one was got an interest in it or whatsoever. So that was always at the back of my mind. But I've done a little bit of work with Matthew, sort of going through a chapter. He sent it over, he'd wrote it fantastically well, and just thought of why not? And it was quite a sort of a therapeutic process, sort of going back over the years, going over some fantastic memories, some challenging memories as well. But it was been a really sort of enjoyable process, and pleased that it's sort of out there for people to have a look at if they choose to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely recommend they do, and of course, we'll leave all the relevant links where you can find the book and buy the book in our description below. Obviously, let's talk about Norwich City then, because there's a couple of chapters in there, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because it kind of starts with this real optimism, I sense, about joining Norwich and the opportunity maybe to settle down, be a little bit closer, obviously, to Cambridge, where you're from, and it didn't quite go to plan, but I think throughout it, you can kind of sense that love and maybe understanding you had for Norwich City as a football club.
Yeah, I mean, when the opportunity came up to go to Norwich, they tried to sign me under Nigel Worthington, but the manager at Stoke at the time, Tony Pulis, wouldn't let me go. But then when the opportunity came up again with Peter Grant, I was absolutely buzzing, like you say, to get back down south, to be close to home and to sign for a fantastic football club. And I couldn't wait to get started. And my Norwich City career couldn't have got off to a much better start, scoring against Ipswich in my debut at Portman Road. But then things went wrong very quickly after that, picking up a serious injury and never really getting going at Norwich, never staying fit for a prolonged period of time. And it was like a disappointment, really, because I was so excited to sign for the club, but then things didn't work out. But at the same time, was always, I mean, it is a very special football club. The way that I was treated there, even though that I wasn't able to do what I'd like to do on the pitch, and it was a time where on the pitch I wasn't delivering, but off the pitch I had a fantastic sort of time within a brilliant football club, fantastic teammates, and such a family feel to the club where I was always made to feel so welcome, even if I wasn't sort of earning my money as it was, because I could never really get myself fit to have a real impact on the team at the time.
Yeah, and obviously I'll come back onto that Ipswich game in a moment, but just to sort of touch upon what you say there are a few references actually about the Carrow Road crowd and those moments where actually you come back from injury, and even though they hadn't seen you that much, they were still full of support and really, supportive of you returning. Even I think, as you said at one point, that they hadn't seen a lot of you at that stage. So what did that mean to you? Because there's so much, obviously, being injured as a player is kind of the worst thing, isn't it? So the fact you still had that support and felt that support, that must have been really special to you.
Oh, without a doubt. I think I sort of somewhat endeared myself a little bit to the fans with scoring, excuse me, in my debut against Ipswich. But then like being injured as a footballer is really the worst feeling in the world. And Norwich City was the club without doubt where I probably had the most injuries and never sort of sustained a period of time playing regularly for the team. But every time I played, particularly at Carrow Road, you could sort of feel the support from the fantastic fans there. But it's a feeling of real guilt because obviously you're getting paid good money to do something that you love doing, and not being able to do that was always something that I found very hard, not just at Norwich but at the other clubs I played for, when I wasn't able to do what I was being asked to do because I wasn't fit and I had injury problems, not being able to do that. And I think the injury that I got in that first game at Ipswich was sort of how it seemed to go on at Norwich, and never really, as I said before, got myself in a position where I could really have a real impact in what was a really good squad at the time.
Yeah, and you mentioned that Ipswich game. Look, if you score in an East Anglian derby, you get remembered. I think pretty well. Period. Really, there's not much exception to that, irrespective of what you go on to do. So, just on that moment, firstly, what was that like to score? Did you realise the magnitude? I know in your book you said it was kind of being hyped up, but that was your first experience in the East Anglian derby. Did you realise kind of the significance of not just playing in it, but scoring a goal in it as well, particularly at Portman Road?
Yeah, I think sort of growing up in the East Anglia region, you sort of understand that it is a massive derby, Norwich v Ipswich, and sort of scoring in that goal. You even at Portman Road, not at Carrow, but you could hear the fans that were in the other corner to where I sort of scored, and sort of ran off towards them. And it wasn't like you knew it was a special moment to have done that in such an important game. But then sort of as the game went on and I picked up the injury, and I knew immediately that it was sort of something that I weren't going to be back from in a couple of weeks. And I think that was the massive disappointment. And I remember lying on the treatment bed at Portman Road and then being carted off in an ambulance. You understood that it wasn't the ideal start. Despite scoring a goal, it was quite a challenging start to my career at Norwich.
Yeah, I mean, talk to us about that injury, because it's a bit of a freak one by all accounts, wasn't it? I know you mentioned there was a microphone involved, and it feels like initially, sort of reading the book, that you felt you were more concerned about your shoulder perhaps than your knee initially.
Yeah, so I had an ongoing issue with my shoulder. I sort of got barged off the pitch. I remember my first feeling was I was winded, which is obviously a horrible feeling. I was trying to catch my breath, and then obviously I could feel my shoulder was displaced, and managed to get that back in. And I remember sort of just relief of getting that pain out from my shoulder. Then Adam Jury, our left back, came over and said, "Oh, don't look down." Immediately, the first thing I done was look down and saw a gaping hole in my knee, and sort of then that sort of shock took over. And I remember sort of being on the stretcher, getting carried round the pitch, and the sort of stretcher bearer nearly sort of dropped me a couple of times. I was clinging on for dear life. The Norwich fans give me a generous round of applause, but I certainly received some stick from the Ipswich fans as I got towards the dressing room. And then when I got into the dressing room, it was just a case of, this feels like a real sort of bad one. The doctor was trying to stitch it up, but the sort of the hole in my knee was too wide to be able to do that. Then the suggested next course of action was to head off to the hospital. And I remember sort of having an operation that evening, trying to sort of clear it up and to sort of stitch the knee back together, and ended up spending my first two nights as a Norwich City player in Ipswich General Hospital, which obviously isn't ideal.
No, it definitely is. There's probably very few Norwich players that have signed for the club and then spent the next few days in hospital. I mean, the interesting point for me was you were a loan player, and look, clearly I know there was, obviously Norwich said that they were going to make that permanent in January, but the fact they honoured that agreement, even though the injury, again, that must be indicative to you of the type of club that it is, because I can imagine some clubs in that cases maybe would have, I don't know, reneged on that agreement or tried to push you back, but the fact they didn't do that probably speaks about how highly they rated you.
Yeah, and I think more so as the type of club and the people at the club in terms of what that meant. Obviously, that's something that I'll never forget the club doing for me. I remember being in my hospital bed when I woke up the next morning, and Peter Grant, the manager, phoned me and sort of put my mind at rest, because obviously in my mind it was, I'm going to have to go back to Stoke, get all my rehab done there, then see if the move still materialises. But the fact that they stuck to their word is just shows everything about the football club and the people, and sort of got me back fit again. And unfortunately, I couldn't really repay that with my sort of career at Norwich City, which is something that will always be sort of a regret to me. But sort of I'll never forget what the club done in that situation.
I mean, it was a tough period to play for Norwich. Obviously, they went on subsequently after you left to get relegated to League One. But I mean, you mentioned it as well. Some of the players that were in that dressing room, Darren Huckaby, you mentioned Adam Drury already, two absolute legends of Norwich City. Dion Dublin, who I know is a legend of yours, and obviously as the forward in your book as well. Lee Croft, Robert Earnshaw. We could go on. I mean, the fact that Norwich City squad probably underachieved, I guess, to an extent. I mean, you were in the squad at the time. What was kind of the reason for that? Because certainly you look back now and some of those names, you think, blimey, there's some really talented players in that group.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of why it didn't happen, why we didn't see the success, it's hard to say really. In terms of the dressing room, the team spirit, it was a wonderful group of people within that dressing room. Everyone was together within that, and I think we struggled under sort of Peter, who's a brilliant man, to really get the right blend, the right sort of formation. Then obviously Glenn Roeder came in, and it didn't click then as well. So I think it was sort of quite surprising in terms of obviously the names you mentioned and many more that were in that squad at the time that should have been sort of competing at the top end of the championship and not the bottom end. But it was certainly nothing to do with sort of the camaraderie, the team spirit, which was always excellent within the group in my time there.
Yeah, I mean, let's speak about Dion, because I know he's a real personal hero of yours. What was that like to play with him? As you say, you watched him sort of growing up playing for your boyhood club Cambridge, and then the opportunity to play with him at the end. You're obviously at Hillsborough that day. You got the standing ovation from all four sides. Just a great man, isn't he?
Oh yeah, it was surreal, really, sharing a dressing room with Dion, someone who I'd grown up, sort of idolising, and then sort of to be his teammate, to become quite close with him within that dressing room. I think I sort of bored him stupid on a daily basis, trying to ask him questions about his time at Cambridge, getting him to sign old Cambridge United shirts that I had at home. So he was like an incredible footballer without a shadow of a doubt, but such a inspiring human being in terms of what he was, a real sort of leader of men within that dressing room, and so sort of down to earth in terms of what he'd achieved throughout his football career, and like a special person to have shared a dressing room, and something that I'm really grateful to have had the opportunity to have done so in my football career.
And Darren Huckaby, the other one, of course, that we have to mention, that's still very much a legend in these parts and an ambassador at the club these days. I mean, it's interesting you write about it in the book, where you were sold the move, and it was kind of a front three of Huckaby, you and Earnshaw, which I think would obviously have been very exciting. And is there and you kind of touched upon it, but the frustration maybe that you weren't able to make that a reality more often because of the injuries that obviously you suffered, but that would have been a really mouth-watering front three, wouldn't it?
It would have been wonderful to have been more of a part of that front line of players that you sort of mentioned there, like talking about Hux. He was one of the most exciting players I think that I've ever sort of played with. Like, he could give him the ball and he'd make something happen wherever he was on the pitch, the way that he could travel with the ball, the way that he glide past players, and obviously a brilliant finisher as well. Probably left lucky he had Adam Drury playing behind him to do all that sort of defensive work that maybe he didn't like doing as much, but like a special player, and rightly sort of remembered as a real legend at Norwich City.
And in terms of the Glenn Roeder coming in and that period, it's clearly very difficult for the club, and obviously you can see where they went on to. But for you, I mean, you kind of speak about it a little bit in the book, but the changes of the environment and whatnot, and that kind of brought your spell at Norwich to an end, didn't it? Obviously, more injury frustration on top of that. Was it just a sense maybe that because of everything that had happened, coupled with maybe that obviously that managerial relationship not quite being what you needed it to be, that actually it was probably best for you to go and find something else? And obviously you went on to move to MK Dons and played nearly 250 games for them, so it didn't pan out too badly in terms of a decision.
Yeah, I think it just got to a point where you sort of know, like, things weren't happening, like, as you rightly say, sort of looking back on what had happened before, and it just felt like I was never going to get myself in a position to have a real impact there. And I didn't want to be just a squad player. I didn't want to sit on the bench week in, week out. So it was a case of finding somewhere where I could play football regularly and just sort of try and get myself fit and enjoy my football. And like you say, fortunately, I went to MK Dons, had a really sort of good spell there, really enjoyed my time there, still sort of back home in the Cambridge area, being able to travel into work. And it just fitted really well. Don't get me wrong, it was a disappointment to leave Norwich City, but I think in my mind it just got to a point where I need a fresh start, I need a fresh challenge, and MK Dons is where sort of I found that fresh challenge.
Is there any part of you, given what Norwich then went on to do, obviously dropped into League One, but double promotions under Paul Lambert? Is there any part of you that thinks, oh, blimey, if I'd have held it out for maybe a little bit longer, maybe it could have been different, would have been different? Or can you not allow yourself to have those thoughts as a professional footballer?
Yeah, I mean, I just don't think that's sort of in my nature to do that. I was delighted to see, obviously I weren't delighted to see him go down to League One, but to see the way that they came back, the incredible sort of seasons that they had under Paul, and to get into the Premier League as well. And I think, like, in terms of myself, I would then move. I think as a footballer, you move on, and you move on very quickly. That's the way of the industry, and you're sort of fully focused on what you're doing. But I always looked out for Norwich. I look out for all the previous teams that I played for, and sort of hope the best for them. It's quite strange, really. The majority of teams that are left then went on to have a really successful spell. So I don't know if that's anything to do with me leaving, or if it was just a coincidence, really. But I was delighted to see, obviously, the success that the club had post me sort of going on to MK Dons.
And that sort of brings us full circle, really, because I was going to ask you a little bit about, how closely, if at all, you kind of follow the club now. I'm sure you keep tabs on all your former clubs and how they're getting on. So yeah, what's your sort of watching relationship with Norwich like at the moment and over the last few years?
Yeah, so always sort of look out, like as you said, I had really positive experiences at all the club. I never left sort of under any cloud or anything like that, and always look out and sort of support all the previous teams that I've played for. I think Norwich have had a sort of a challenging sort of times, maybe just sort of looking to push on, but just stuck around that sort of mid-table at the moment. I think in terms of looking at some of the signings that have come in over the summer, obviously the new manager who's got a fantastic reputation and plays really, really attractive free-flowing football, that the signs are really positive going into the new season at Carrow Road, and hopefully be right up there come the end of the season.
Yeah, I mean, I want to ask you a bit about Harry Darling. I don't know if he's somebody that you know personally, but clearly big Cambridge connections like yourself. I mean, really interesting move for him, isn't it, to step into Norwich at this stage of his career?
Yeah, so Harry's someone I've sort of coached a little bit in his time as a youth player at Cambridge, and then obviously moved on to MK Dons, where he was brilliant when he got in the team at Cambridge, but really stepped up another level at MK Dons and was really an outstanding player in League One, where they just missed out on the playoffs. Then obviously gone to Swansea, where he's become a really consistent player for them. And I think it's a fantastic move for Harry to sort of be a little bit closer to home as well in the sort of the Cambridge Suffolk area, and to really go on and sort of push on at Norwich. And I think he can be a top championship player, and he's sort of shown that in his time at Swansea, but now maybe that bit of a push up in terms of what's expected at Swansea and what's expected at Norwich City to really support them in their sort of hopeful promotion challenge next season.
Well, Luke, thank you very much for joining us. Of course, as I said right at the beginning, Luke's book, Not Just a Pretty Face, available to read now in all good bookshops and online as well. I'd really recommend it. It's some really good stuff on Norwich, and it's worth a read for Dion Dublin's foreword alone, which is excellent as well. Luke, thank you very much for your time. Great to catch up with you, and I'm sure we'll see you again very soon.
Thank you, Connor.